More than any other time in the past, we need to connect ourselves and children with nature and the environment. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm an environmental educator who wants to connect all of you with a bit of inspiration. In each episode of the Nature Talks podcast, I'll talk to incredible educators, scientists, thinkers, and innovators who are connecting those around them to nature and the outdoors and inspiring new generations of environmental stewards. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode number 17 of the Nature Talks podcast, the environmental education podcast, the podcast that is about all things related to climate action, taking care of the environment, ecology, you name it. This is the place to be. And each week I get to talk to an amazing guest, and this week it's the same thing. Well, I say each week. I'll go back and say each episode. It's been a little while since we've been here. In episode number 16, I was very fortunate enough to have an amazing conversation with Kath Murdoch all about the environment and curiosity and inquiry. This episode, another fantastic conversation, this time with Dr. Jody Green. And Jody Green is an entomologist. For those of you who may not know what that word is, she's a bug scientist, an insect scientist. She's a Canadian who is now based in the United States and working out of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And she is also a co-host of the Arthropod, a podcast all about the smaller, more interesting creatures around us that have such an important role. And Jody comes on this episode to talk about how she went from life in Canada, growing up there, and how she became an entomologist, now based in the United States. She talks about her important work educating adults and people about why insects are important and why we shouldn't jump the gun all the time and think negatively of them. We also have a fantastic conversation about ecology, about the importance of these little critters in the environment. And we talk about a lot of really cool things. It was a fantastic conversation. And you know what? It's time for you to sit back and have a listen. All right. Well, folks, welcome to another episode of the Nature Talks podcast. It's Kevin here again with another awesome episode, another awesome guest. This episode, we are chatting with someone who is a scientist, an entomologist, a Canadian who is now working in the United States and who is a co-host of a wonderful podcast all about bugs and science and all of that goodness. Jody Green, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you so much. This is really cool for me. I have to admit, in the last several weeks, I've had a chance to interview a couple of podcasters who've been people I've been listening to for a really long time. So a few weeks ago, I got to interview Nate Swick of the American Birding Podcast. And I don't know if I'd call myself a birder, but I'm a fan of birds. And I've been listening to his podcast for years. And now I've got one of the co-hosts of the Arthropod on. So I'm pretty stoked about that. So I asked you to join us on the podcast because, you are someone who is immersed in many different facets of the natural world. And I was wondering if you could, let the listeners know a little bit about your kind of origin story of how you came from, where you were in Canada to this, an entomologist living in America. How did this happen?
Yeah, I would have never put that path for myself when I was a kid or at any point. And I think that's one thing that I did learn about myself is that you can do whatever you want to do. And even though you don't know what you want to do, it might work out. It's really about your attitude and your passion and the things that interest you. And I was someone who actually didn't want to go to college. Can you believe that? And then I spent so much time going to university and going to school. But it's a long story and a short story at the same time. It's just, the short story is it took a really long time. I'm a late bloomer to find what I really liked doing, which was, studying entomology, but a particular part of it. And it was more pest management, but not in like people think about that and they think about spraying, where I was like, if you need to know your enemy, if that's your enemy, get to know it really well. Mm-hmm. And so that was my motivation to figure out how to combat them, or how to, and in the end, it's not the end. Mm-hmm. A lot of these insects, arthropods, are not pests at all, and they're fascinating. Mm-hmm. And whether they are pests or not, actually, I find them fascinating. The more, pesty they are, actually, the more I admire them. So, and then the really long story is that, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I always grew up with my parents and my sister and brother in southwestern Ontario. So we grew up in Kitchener, Waterloo, yep. And we backed onto a forest. And so that's all we ever did was go out and play in the woods.
Yeah.
And that was normal for us. Mm-hmm. We would make clay pots out of the clay we would find in the creek, and we'd find bugs and we'd climb trees. And now when I go back, it's actually it's a park that's like manicured. They put in walkways. They made it very beautiful for non-nature lovers, like people that need to go out there, right?
I get you, yeah.
Railings and things like that. But when we got to it, it was nature.
Yeah.
And that's where we played all the time until we had to come back in. And then we also had a cottage. Our family had a cottage, or a shared cottage. So we would go out into the woods. It was called Mazenau Lake. It was kind of far. At that time, it felt like miles and miles away, a lifetime away. But we didn't even have indoor plumbing there. So it was an outhouse, and it'd be the scariest thing to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and all the spiders. And, we would see these swimming keys, which were giant tadpoles, so the things that we saw, we didn't know what they were. Mm. We would invent what they were, but we would explore them. We would watch, we would go fishing. We would get leeches on us. We would just play.
Yeah.
And there, my dad was a small animal veterinarian until I was about 10. So he was involved with, animals and gross things. Like we grew up and there were, dead animals in the freezer at the animal hospital, because, and that was normal. Yeah. But we were always taught like that these are people's pets. This is how people treat their pets. We don't want pets suffering, like those differences.
Yeah.
And then just over time, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian like my dad, but right before going into university, he told me, Joe, this isn't for you. You would get bored. He's like, it's all spades and neuters. He's like, this is not for you. And I listened to that. And then I was like, fine, I'm not going to college, because I was like all or nothing. And then my mom, who's probably all the sweetness in my life, so I'm pretty tough and independent. And then anything that's nice about me probably came from my mother. And she said, everyone gets old. You should study gerontology. Help. Right? So I got a degree.
It's sensible.
I got a degree in gerontology at the University of Guelph.
Okay, yeah.
And then I was like, yeah, I don't really want to do anything with this. Like, I don't want to go into administration, and I love old people, but this just isn't for me. Yeah. And then I went to Sir Sanford Fleming, which they used to call Sir Sandbox, because they said that you didn't have to be that smart. You just went and played out in the woods. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I think probably, I don't know if you're like growing up in Canada, there's a big difference between university and college.
Yeah, they're not. I know it's not like in the States where just everything's college. I know, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've been to both. Like I've gone to university twice. I've got the BA, 4-year BA. Then I later went to New Brunswick Community College for 2 years and got my diploma. And I was a computer graphic guy in the internet bubble era. And then I later became a teacher later on in life. Yeah.
Yeah. So it. You're just you are going with what what you want to do when you want to do it. And so, yeah, the 4-year, theoretical university was gerontology. But then when I went to the 2-year diploma in Lindsay, Ontario, a really small town, we would skip classes to go and hang out and go ice fishing on the lake. Like it was outside all the time because it was a school of natural resources.
Okay, yeah.
And it's more hands-on. And I did environmental pest management, and it was all about catching like beavers and rats and different things. And that really excited me in the way that I was helping people get rid of these animals that they didn't want. And how to exclude birds without killing them, like how to deter them from being there. Kind of like, how, if this is your enemy or this is what you're trying to get rid of, how to outsmart them, I guess, instead of, shooting them or killing them or poisoning them. So it was kind of like that. And then at the end of that, I was actually the valedictorian of the school that year. Like I found what I really enjoyed doing, and it didn't seem like it would match who I was or what was expected of me. And then I reached out to the author of my favorite book that they would never, ever, they wouldn't let get checked out. It was like a reference book. It's like this big blue textbook called The Truman Guide to Scientific Pest Management.
Okay.
I reached out to the author of that book and was like, I want to know more about entomology, because it was all pests. Yeah. And I didn't know a lot about entomology. And he was like, a professor at Purdue. And he was like, why don't you come and see if you want to study here? And I was like, no, I just want to take some classes. Like, I don't even know where that is.
Yeah.
And I don't want to leave Canada. And he would just like, yeah, if you can come, there's a conference, you can come to this conference, I'll take care of you. And I went to that conference. I met him in January, and I moved down there and started school at Purdue in August.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's quite impressive. Well,
and then I never left.
Interesting how the lightning bolts hit. And I mean, we find very interesting paths. Like, I went to university. I got the 4-year BA, and the only reason why I went to university was because my dad, came from this farming village in Eastern Ontario, place that's outside of Cornwall, Ontario, called Long Sault. And he was a massive family with 17 kids. He was the oldest farm family. And he kind of pulled him up by the bootstraps. Went to University of Toronto, won the Governor's General's Medal, got his master's, working on his PhD, all this stuff. And he was just like, you're my son, you're going to university. That's it. And I'm like, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life. He's like, I don't care. You're going to university. I'm like, but I don't know what I want to do. So I ended up getting like a general BA, and when I was done with a BA, I couldn't get a job as a waiter in a restaurant because they're like, oh, you've got a degree. You're way too overqualified. And, I ended up going to community college and I, was hired, had a job months before I even graduated. That was, doing tech stuff. And then, did the whole go to Korea and teach English for a couple of years. And I thought I really liked this stuff. So I went back to university and got that teaching degree. And ironically enough, now I'm doing environmental education courses through Queen's University online. And I love it.
So you're still learning. You're still in school.
And ironically enough, I was actually looking into, this is something I maybe plan to do in a year or two. University of Nebraska-Lincoln offer master's courses in entomology where I can actually just take courses. Yeah. And I don't even have to get into a degree stream, because I'm like, the idea of getting into a degree stream kind of scares me with a full-time job and stuff. But I can take courses. So that's something that may be happening for me in a year or two from now. We'll see.
Yeah. That's awesome. But I highly recommend it. I've got people asking me all the time because I'm courtesy faculty with the department. So I sit in on a lot of their meetings, and they are considering some like certifications for that instead of a degree. Oh, so cool. That would be really excellent for you. Yeah.
We'll see. It's I always talk about, that's my cool factor as a primary school teacher, the bug thing. You want to be a rock star in an elementary school, be the bug guy or the bug gal. And just everyone thinks you're so cool. Okay, so so you're an entomologist now. You kind of accidentally found yourself into this role, and I know that there's a lot of different types of entomology. But in 2020, one of the themes we talk about in this podcast often is more than any time. We need to be caring about that natural world. We need to be caring about everything around us, the biology, the biodiversity. Why would you say that being an entomologist is so? I feel it's really important. Why would you say it's such an important role to have in 2020?
Well, I think too.
Or 2022, sorry.
Oh,
That was a few years ago. Back then too. It was important then too.
Well, I think entomology just is weaved into every aspect of our lives. If people think that insects don't matter or arthropods are insignificant or like one thing or one person doesn't matter, like think about a mosquito. Yeah, we go to the bad ones evidently, but there's so many things weaved into it that are the good, like our food and our environment. We wouldn't have plants if we didn't have pollinators. We wouldn't have our food. There are so many things that are not necessary when people say entomology, like you study bugs, but there's like bugs in health and bugs in food and all of the studies that help with medicine because of genetics. And, even when there's, the venom of spiders or scorpions, the medical implications of these studies. So, repellents, there's so many things that have to do with insects, whether it's directly or indirectly. And if we don't have them, our food webs and our ecosystems all just change. And we don't know what's going to happen. And I think one of the things that I don't necessarily like when I'm asked is this a good bug or a bad bug? And I get asked that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think if we removed ourselves, like the human aspect of it, they're just organisms trying to survive and be part of this ecosystem. So when we put ourselves in there, we build our homes in these forests and we knock down habitat for insects and put our habitat there, and then they're our pests. Like that's our problem. And it, that doesn't mean they're bad, so I think that's one of the things I struggle with, whether something's good or bad, because it really depends on your location, your situation, the population, and your education. So, and I mention that all the time because for me, not that I'm highly educated, but I know a lot about the arthropods. And so I love a lot of the arthropods. So when someone brings me a spider, that pest and pet, it's just the letter S,
Yeah.
So just look at it in a different way, but they're just so important to having, to having balance and beauty in the world.
Yeah. That's that interesting. I've heard that one before that, and I may have heard it on an episode of the Arthropod, just like, for example, that, and I've heard other people talk about the argument of monarch butterflies, for example, or any butterfly. There's all the biological implications, but then there's also just the fact that they're beautiful and we need beauty in life, and our world is just a better place with a bit of extra beauty in it.
Right. I know. And so, I was on the gardening show last night.
Okay.
And a lot of it's like, I don't like these grubs in the soil while I'm digging out my onions and my potatoes. Like, what should I do with them? And I was like, well, are they ruining your potatoes and onions? Are they making it unharvestable? No. I was like, so you just don't like them there? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, pick them out, put them in a tin can, feed them to the birds. They will appreciate that. And if you were wanting to treat your soil with something, you'd have to not have anything to eat for yourself just to kill the grubs, this and and so it's like trying to get them to understand that it's a system. And if you, and just because you don't like them there, like they're not ruining your food, they're not ruining your harvest, you just don't like them. But is it worth, so it's that balance, and we all make decisions based on what we know. And so my job here is just to educate with research-based information so people can make the best decisions for them. Sometimes my clients want to know who they should hire or what they should do. I can't tell them what to do, but I can, give them the information. So, and then how you do that really, really matters. And so, you talk about teachers or teaching, children, the people that I actually teach. My gerontology actually comes together with the master gardeners that I teach.
Okay, yeah.
And they are with their grandchildren a lot. So a lot of times right now, their grandparents are all into bugs and I'm teaching them. And then they're bringing me their grandchildren and showing them me. And so like last night I met some kids that way. but also the grandparents are really, really into some of the things that I'm talking about just based on the way I'm talking about it, right? Because they've, it really never occurred to them that it's just because they don't like it or because it makes holes in my flowers and they're not pretty.
Yeah.
But and one of our guests on Arthropod, she had said about this 10-step program, right? She said, step back 10 feet and look at your plant. If it still looks good, it's fine, right?
Nice. Yeah.
We're so obsessed with how things look that we're willing to treat it, affect some pollinators or bees or flies or things that we aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
And then something eats that plant, or something eats something we've poisoned because we don't want this vole out there and a bird of prey gets, poisoned. We affect everything. Mm-hmm. So, we have to make better decisions for the planet, for our immediate landscape and the neighborhood and, the community and the world. So it's just that little thing. I mean, drift with pesticide can go and ruin things that you have no intent to do that. But if you don't follow a label and, those kind of rules and laws are there to protect bees in the environment. And so, sometimes people don't want to listen to me because I'm pest management or urban pest management. That's my specialty. Mm-hmm. But, my goal is for us to manage the pests in our environment without affecting in a negative way the things around us, because everything's connected. So how can we do that sustainably and feel good about it? And so like last night, I was pretty delighted because I did not have to say a single chemical active ingredient. I didn't have to mention it because everyone had asked me something about organic or natural. Some people brought up essential oils or vinegar. And I just said, you know what, if you're out there and you love your landscape, go. You're looking at them. You took a picture of them. Those are great pictures. Here's how you use iNaturalist. Log that. Be part of this community that's always looking for the diversity of insects. And then also handpick them if you don't like them there, Yeah. And they're like, oh, good point. I've been vacuuming squash bugs at one of the gardens with a battery operated vacuum.
Yeah.
I've been eliminating hundreds of bugs every week. No chemicals.
Yeah, I can remember.
Am I vacuuming a garden? Yes, very odd, but.
Yeah, I've seen more odd things. I've been living in China for the last 6 years. Interestingly enough, I mean, like that reminds me of pre-pandemic, the last time I was able to visit Ontario. I would spend my summer afternoons relaxing while listening to a podcast while picking Japanese beetles off of my brother's trees in the backyard and knocking them into little containers filled with soapy water. Here in my apartment in Shenzhen, China, I've got a bunch of chili peppers I'm growing, and I bring I put the pots on a little table, and I hand crush the aphids on the leaves. And I find if I just do it every day, it's manageable, no problem. And it's bizarrely meditative, and my plants are happier, and didn't have to spray anything on anything.
Right. Yeah. That's part of your routine. That's part of your habit. That's what you do to get the most out of what you're doing. You get to see the bugs, and you get to, grow your plants, and you're happy with how you're managing your pests.
Yeah.
Right. And I think everybody wants a silver bullet. And when I say, well, just spray them off with a strong spray of hose water, that will get rid of your aphids. And then they're like, yeah, but they come back. I'm like, yeah, they're going to come back. That's what they do, and I will talk about parthenogenesis and like why they multiply, but it's not a one and done. This is something when you plant and you want to be sustainable and you want to take care of, you need to do this on a regular basis. When those plants are there, like these insects are programmed to eat this food. Everything has a will, they're going to survive.
Yeah.
And so they're going to keep coming for it. That pressure means you got to step it up. Mm-hmm. It's all work. If it was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting. It seems to be that for a lot of people, when they start to understand, if you can paint the picture of that system of the bugs, the birds, that, like if we wipe all those, and I've actually had this conversation many times recently, not just with like my own two children who are 12 and 9, but with I teach kindergarten, and with my kindergarten kids. about like we need these bugs because birds eat them, and we all love birds. And I've talked about that on an episode with Nate Swick about how birds are one of the easiest ways to engage children or adults in with nature, because we see birds everywhere, no matter where we go, urban or rural, and making that kind of circular connection that it's a system. And if there were no bugs, then the birds would starve and die. So we need those bugs. So it's really interesting to kind of, with adults, need to understand that too.
Right.
And it's
for sure.
it's cool that like what I heard you saying about, you did this workshop for these master gardeners, many of them being grandparents, and that's a wonderful opportunity. Maybe you're now creating a generation of elderly educators, because they are educators. We teach our children, we teach our grandchildren, and to be honest, as a school teacher who's been teaching primary for 20 years, there is a lot to be said. And I think when you say that parents and families are the most important educators in a child's life, they are. They really are. I can teach them things at school. They can remember that. They can hold it. But when their families teach them, that sticks so much more, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, absolutely. And, there are some families that just need that push. I know when my daughter came home with the orange bag. So there's one of these orange trash bags, but it's for recycled. They call it the energy bag. And I don't know if Omaha, Nebraska was part of like this test group, but there are these orange bags you put in, I want to say like chip bags and bread bags. Like it's like the plastics, like the thin, it's the stuff that can't be recycled, but they taught them all this stuff. And so my daughter, because she's like, okay, these can be recycled, and these things go in this orange bag. They go here and they get made into, I don't know if it's diesel fuel. It goes somewhere, but it's recycled, so she loves that. And so we started that, but that was through school. Mm-hmm. And that was because probably I'm her parent. And I'm like, okay, if this is for the environment, sure. I looked into it, read about it, and then was like, yes, let's employ that. We do vermicomposting worms. And so she probably thinks it's normal to have, worms in your basement and save your compost stuff. And so, if you have an open mind and it's just, I know everyone's so busy. It's really hard. I was lucky enough and at the time I didn't think I was lucky. I didn't have a job that paid enough to sustain childcare for the first 5 years of my daughter's life. So I stayed home with her, and I'm not like a stay-at-home type of person. I didn't know what that even meant. So we were never home. Actually, we were always on the go. Mm-hmm. She never napped. And for me, that was great because we always were doing something. I would put her in a running stroller. We would run the town. I would pick up things all over town. Okay. But we also went to a lot of state parks. We went to the zoo. We went to all sorts of safari places, all the places that I actually wanted to go.
Yeah.
To see things. And because I wasn't, I guess, an entomologist or had a job at that time, I just always wanted to stay current with what was happening where I was. Mm-hmm. And I wanted her to have as much nature as possible because growing up for her would be so different, drastically different than me growing up in the forest, I feel like. And my husband, he's from Indiana, Iowa, like farm living. So like all about outdoors and just a different, more prairie and cows. But very outdoorsy. So I would have to take her places and let her explore. And it's now when I look back, it was good that I didn't have any family or other friends influencing whether it was bad or not. Cause I just kind of like plopped her down like in a prairie or whatever and just let her explore because if I'm always there showing her what to look at, how to do things, she's not learning for herself. Yeah. And, she climbed things. She looked through gross things. She loves mud and she's 13 now. So nothing I do is cool. So that experiment is over for a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But
I hear they come back though. I hear eventually they start to think we're cool again.
See. But my mother-in-law is a retired kindergarten teacher, and I went to her classroom in Indiana once to do a program. Oh, and I was tired by the end of that half an hour. So I applaud you for all that you do with the kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I do it. But I do it, and I it brings a lot of joy, and that's interesting because one of the things that we're talking about, those connections with families and parents, and oftentimes I would love to be able to take those parents out for a nature walk. I want to take just the parents, leave the kids at home, because a lot of the kids, I work in a very urban environment, and I've been teaching in urban environments for 20 years now, in Japan, in Korea, in Beijing, now where I am in Shenzhen. And the same theme is I teach a lot of upper middle class or very upper class, very fortunate children who financially have a lot of means, and they come from families with a lot of means in an urban area. And often they have parents who were never exposed to the kind of childhood that you've described you having. So I have kids who've, some of the famous quotes from children in my mind are, "Mr. O'Shea, my mother says nature's dirty." Or "Mr. O'Shea, birds are yucky," and my daddy says like blah blah, these kind of things, and you're like, wow, all right, we've got work to do, kid. I've got a year with you, and I wish I could have your dad sitting beside you right now.
Right.
And I'd teach him too, but so it's sometimes an uphill battle, because I had a very similar upbringing to you. I grew up in Nova Scotia in a little fishing village, and the outside was a playground. But now my own two children, who are growing up with a man who has lots of stag beetles in his office, because I've got like a bunch of beetles and bugs, and they're used to be having like dead bugs all over the place and these things. But both of my kids were born in the big city. They've always lived in big cities. So it's interesting, because I find myself battling, trying to teach them things or trying to get them outdoors. And it's not easy for me. I find that I often can understand the struggles that other urban parents have. Even though I'm the bug guy, it's hard to get out to the bugs sometimes. But yeah. So
and do it for I don't know, like life is just, now it's like, okay, I have 15 minutes to do this. Like I'm always, what do I say? I'm always like half an hour early or 10 minutes late, because I've got half an hour. I'm like, oh my gosh, so many things I can do. And then I go and do them, and then I'm 10 minutes late. Yeah. But when you're a kid, you're supposed to just take your time and learn things. But we shove kids places, and then we're like, okay, learn whatever you can learn. It's hard to do that with nature. And so, I mean, we have a really nice botanic garden. So we would go there, and I would just like stick her in a place, and I would be off to the side. And, I just wanted her to explore. Yeah. And like the one time I came back, and she had like this raft made out of a leaf with all these little things around. It was, someone called it like a Viking ceremony, but she had she found a dead praying mantis, and she put it on like, and that's like, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, this isn't a waste of time, because she's being creative. She's doing whatever, but it's like, if you can't get them out there to see these things. And there was a children's garden, and it was all the senses, right? What you can smell, what you can touch. It's a really cool little display. And that's where she found lamb's ear, right? And she would just be petting the flower. And we talked about texture. She was a very tactile kid. So, that's why we have lamb's ear in the garden. And, now she'll, on our pollinator habitat, and she'll come out and she'll still pet the leaves, and she'll look at the flowers. And even though it's not cool, quote, cool anymore, she'll come out and look at the garden and say what she saw out there, what she's identified and looked. And I'm glad that we had that time together now. And I'm glad that I, brought her to all these different events, whether she thought she was an expert or not. And she could be exactly like you are. You're an entomologist. You don't need to go to college. That's what she says. I'm an entomologist. I just don't have to go to college for that, But she, I think it's all about appreciating them and respecting them. You don't have to love all things, but you don't have to kill them either, right? And so it hurts her feelings if people are killing bugs for no reason. I am probably one of the entomologists that don't have a big collection of dead things. When I do collect it, it's for teaching purposes. I love taking live insects places. So people can see what they actually look like. So like last night, I actually brought brown recluse spiders on. I've got a couple in my office right now because, we're told about them. And then we're always told about how dangerous they are. And so everyone sees how plain and boring they are. They're not like this fire breathing dragon with, and so, they're just little boring brown spiders. And sometimes they get pressed up against our skin. Sometimes this happens, but we need to be, cognizant that there are critters in our shoes, maybe in our, like we do things that encourage, bugs that we might not enjoy in our spaces, so it's to think about it in a different way. And they're not really out to kill us or hurt us. Right. But that's how it feels to them. So, but so when you were talking about taking parents out, the 4-H department here does, I partner with them we call them nature night walks.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's a family event. So families come, and I can tell you that some parents, they will like pretty much like not shove their kid out of the way, but their kid will be like, I'm tired. And no, we got to keep going because they're getting into it. But they really need someone to take them on a walk. Yeah. They need someone to open their eyes up to what is actually happening here, and how, if you just stop and look around a little bit, like nature's happening all around. We just don't take the time to look.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm running around looking for a sample, and I'm like, no, wait, calm down, Jody. All you need to do is plop yourself down somewhere, breathe, relax, and look around you, because you'll find it. Something will crawl out of somewhere. A roly-poly will go here. A woodlouse hunter will be behind it, and stuff like that. Follow the moisture. All of the things that you learn to, I guess, profile your pest. That's how you eliminate those conditions, those favorable conditions. You look for those favorable conditions for the insects that and that's where you will find them.
Nice. So, yeah, cool. I love that slow down and look thing. And that's something that I've like a mantra I've used for years with growing up, saying kids, just slow down and look. And even in the middle of a big city, if you slow down and look at a tree, you'll find something cool, right? You'll find something interesting. And even in the middle of a city of 17 million where I'm at now, if you slow down and look, there's some pretty darn cool things. And it was interesting how, like, just on our school campus, I started here 4 years ago, and I discovered that there were all kinds of fruit bat colonies living under the palm trees. And I met all these. I talked to a teacher. He's like, I've been here for 15 years. I had no idea. I'm like, did you ever just look up under the leaves? He was like, no. I'm like, well, I didn't. I just moved from like a cold place to here. And one day I was just out in this park. I'd never seen trees like this. So I was just looking at them a lot. And then I noticed, hey, there's bats. And I walked over to the next one and looked, and hey, there's bats. And then I went for another walk in another part of the city, and I saw those same trees, and I looked, and hey, there's bats. So then I took out my camera and took photos and identified them with my naturalist, found out what kind of bat it was, and started reading. But it's all around. So I want to jump over, again, I keep the thing that so many interviewees here, I always say, I don't want to keep you long.
No, you can keep me as long as you want, because this is way better than my day job. How about that?
This is so much fun to talk about this stuff.
Well, do you want to know what my day job is?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
You kind of talked a little bit about it. So I've heard pest management. Again, I listen to your podcast, but for those out there listening to the Nature Talks podcast, they probably don't listen to the arthropod, which we'll get into shortly. But what is that day job?
So I work for the extension office, and we don't have that in Canada either. And I don't know if they have it anywhere else in the world, but they're like the land grant universities. So there's probably like 100 universities in the US, and they're considered land grant universities, and they focus on like teaching, research, and extension. So extension, that is the arm that I work for. So I'm employed by the University of Nebraska, and a lot of times people will know it because they're farm and ag crop people. And so the extension educators or agents, whatever they call them in different states, they will be involved with taking the research, the farming research, to the farmers to make it applicable so they can be better farmers, better, so they know what to do. For me, I'm an urban entomologist. So my specialty is bed bugs, ants, termites, and cockroaches, if you can believe that. And then I've branched off into everything else. But I I'm 100% extension. So I don't do any research and I don't do any formal teaching. I do a lot of guest speaking and presentations and other meetings. But extension is, so that's the arm taking the research from all the universities and taking it to the public. So I'm making it accessible. So people don't have to read peer-reviewed research because I'm the one reading it and kind of putting it into ways that they can use it.
Okay.
Right. So, this brand and I work with the public, which is very different because in an entomology department where my two co-hosts, they're at different universities, they're professors. A lot of times they're dealing with other professors, researchers, and students. And I'm dealing with someone that can just walk in off the street and give me a bag of skin cells or bugs or head lice, or I don't know what I'm going to get on a given day. It's very, there's a fridge that's the lab fridge. That's where the samples go. And so, before I leave and in the mornings, I'll go and look through samples and I'm like, okay. I mean, the good days are like, oh, that's a termite. This is a carpenter ant, And I work for kind of everybody, all the stakeholders in my two counties. So the counties here in Nebraska that I serve are Douglas-Sarpy County, which is like 750,000 people. So they can all email me. They can all call me with their bug problems.
Oh, okay.
Pardon?
So like anybody can just like look through the phone book or like Google you and be like, all right, I got a problem.
Yes. So I actually don't take calls anymore because it would take too long. And sometimes they have so much fun learning about bugs that they're like, I'll call you tomorrow. And I'm like, no, we're not friends. Like, I'm trying to help you.
I've got someone new to talk to. This is great. Right. I got my bug friend.
So we train master gardeners who have to have certain hours. We give them education in these horticulture, vermicomposting, entomology, and then they give back by volunteering. So they'll answer phones and respond to emails and see some of the people. So I train them. The hard ones are the ones that get left in the fridge. So they learn a lot from me and I learn from them and they do help us out a lot. But so that's, I would say my day job is to provide information to people about their urban pest problems or whatever. I get all sorts of things. So it's different every day. So this interview is definitely a highlight and I would prefer to do this.
Well, cool. That's awesome. And I'm sure you must, I can't imagine some of the stuff that must, I mean, like we as kindergarten teachers scratch our heads with the things where we're just like, wow, really? Like, there's 5 teachers on my team. And we'll be like, you know what happened today? So this happened. And we'll be just like, wow, 20 years in the game. And it's like 25 years in the game. Never heard of that happening, or never had a kid say that, or never had that happen. So maybe being a kindergarten teacher is somewhat like that, because like nothing ever, like every day you walk in that room, you're never really sure what might come at you or what a kid might say.
True. Do you have a list so you should have a list, and it's like, so when you have time to write your book, that's what it'll be based on. So I have like I think it's a top 60 now of the strangest things. And so that have come in or people have said or whatever. And like, so now people who know me, they're like, oh my gosh, did that make the list? I'm like, nope, not even close.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, awesome. Yeah.
But I also have to say I'm free, right? It's the taxpayers that pay for the service. So I'm free. So people will bring things in from their dog's body somewhere, because they don't want to go to a veterinarian because it costs money. And I'm like, no, I'm not a veterinarian. Or, they want to show me their bites. And I'm like, I'm not a medical doctor. Like, okay, you can show me a bug and I will identify that. So a lot of the things that are kind of iffy, I need to be a medical doctor, a psychologist, a veterinarian, all sorts of things. But
wow. In many ways, it sounds like my job.
I did teach a summer camp, and I think I taught the kindergartens for maybe a week or two, and then they moved me up because I was like, this is a lot of hugging and pooping your pants. This is not for Jody. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. So I'm curious, arthropod. So the thing you've mentioned co-hosts, I've mentioned the podcast. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what it is, where that came from? So yeah, I can't take credit for the start of that. So Dr. Jonathan Larson, he's an entomologist at the University of Kentucky, he's a professor there. He started this was his brainchild in like 2014. And I don't know really what his vision was, but it was himself. And I think over time, he had a hard time like talking to himself for the period. And then he was like, maybe I need some co-hosts. And so he asked Dr. Mike Scavarla, and he's in Penn State now as a professor and taxonomist. He does a lot of the insect diagnostics there. So it was like 2017 we joined. And so our goal is to do 2 podcast episodes a month. And so we try to schedule that out a couple times a year and just have that in the calendar because it's just such a hard time for all of us to get together. And we do that. And we've got like a Google file or whatever. So we'll put in ideas and then, kind of talk it out that way. It shares the work, I guess. And it's just fun to see those guys. I really, really like them. And I don't get to spend much time with entomologists or friends. So I don't know. Hopefully you can tell that we do.
Yeah,
really
no, absolutely. You guys sound like you have a great relationship. I started listening to the podcast and I'm now getting confused. I think it was 2020. It may have been actually earlier than that, but I can remember actually like literally opening up, like wanting to find you can find podcasts about anything nowadays. Any topic, I'm interested in playing with yellow Lego blocks, only yellow Lego blocks. Well, I'm sure there's a yellow Lego blocks podcast out there. And I don't know why that popped into my mind, but kindergarten teacher. That's why. There was a lot of Lego involved every day, but it's interesting. So I can remember like searching for like entomology podcasts and like subscribing to a whole bunch, and then just like listening to like 5 minutes one and unsubscribing, listening to like unsubscribe, and I've stuck with yours for several years, and it's a lot of fun because, and again, fun for me. Guys out there listening, sometimes it's very inside baseball as far as like the bug world goes, but other times there's been some fun things we're talking about, like relationships with history and like Napoleon and all these different things. Yeah. So, it's I enjoy it a lot. So it's really cool. And that's why I appreciate you taking the time to come on this podcast and chat with me. And it's really cool to hear different voices within the kind of environmental education world, the biological education world. Just in the last few episodes, I've had teachers on, I've had those educators, but I've had, a biologist on recently. I did an episode with Nate Swick talking about how podcasting alone, like podcasting and social media, can be so influential in helping people connect with nature and connect with the environment. And maybe, through podcasting, people, for example, can get more into environmentalism. This is, and we also talked about with the whole concept of COVID birders, with all those people because of lockdowns, they all of a sudden had to slow down their lives. And, I just had an amazing discussion with an educator named Kath Murdoch from Australia the other day. And that's what she talked a lot about, is how, because people were in lockdowns, she's in Australia, they weren't allowed to go anywhere except for walks outside. And because of that, a lot of people were going to parks for the first time, or going down to creeks for the first time and sitting there and looking because they had nothing else they could do.
Yeah, we got so many ID requests from non-pest species. I saw it and I was curious. Like there was an overall increase, I believe, in general curiosity identifications because they were outside. And when different news or media outlets asked if it was a higher tick season, part of it was because more people were outside. So more people are picking up ticks. So more people are complaining about it. And a lot of people got COVID puppies, and COVID puppies need to go for walks outside, and they will get ticks as well. So, there were some changes during COVID, but yeah, people did get to go outside and walk around a lot more. So I think that was probably really good for, like, they started gardening too, because they were home to water and weed and things like that too. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, yeah. So, I mean, that's, I mentioned that other interview I did. I talked about like some silver linings. There's people who may have made connections to the outdoors that probably never would have if they continued with that hectic life. Sometimes it's good to slow down. There we go. Back to that again. But yeah, so it's getting late at night for me over here in China. Jody, so I do really want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How can people find you online if they're interested in seeing what you do, or if they want to listen to the arthropod?
Okay, so our podcast can be listened to on any of the podcatcher apps, but our show notes are arthro-pod at blogspot or sorry. This is why Jonathan does it all the time, and we laugh all the time because we always mess it up, because you do need that dash. arthro-pod.blogspot.com is where our show notes are. We are also on Twitter at arthro-pod. No.
You know what, folks? Don't worry about it. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes. So, guys, when you're looking at all that information underneath your podcast, here in Apple Podcasts or on Google Podcasts, I'm on all those different places too. You'll see it. It'll be there. I'll put the Twitter for the Arthropod and yours as well, for sure.
Mine's at Jody Bugs Me, UNL.
Okay. Nice. Well, Jody, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and thoughts with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, I want to thank Dr. Jody Green for taking the time to stop by the Nature Talks podcast. You can find all of her contact information and stuff down below in the show notes of the podcast. And of course, go check out the Arthropod. It's on Apple Podcasts and all those places where you want to find a podcast. That's where I first encountered Jody Green. I've been listening to the Arthropod for years, and I'm a big fan. And I'm a bug nerd. So that's it for this episode of the Nature Talks podcast. I hope you had a lot of fantastic takeaways from our conversation. I know I certainly did. I want to thank all of you out there who have taken the time to join the Nature Talks podcast community and come on over to our Facebook page. Come on over there, like it, follow it for more resources, and join the conversation about environmental education. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at MadForMaple. I'm always very active on Twitter, not just about education, but also about Japan things. For those who might not know, my wife is Japanese. My kids were born in Kobe, Japan, and I spent more than 10 years living in Japan. So it holds a dear place in my heart, so I often tweet things about Japan. Also, of course, you can find some food tweets and, again, education tweets and a lot of nature stuff, because that's my jam. Of course, you can also follow me on Instagram at Shizen Wildlife, SHIZEN Wildlife. And yeah, join the conversation, see what I'm up to, see what kind of things I'm doing in the garden, often lurking around in my balcony garden or gardening at school. So another thing I did want to mention as I wrap up this episode of the podcast, it is official. My family and I have made the decision. We are leaving China at the end of this school year. So in June of 2023, we will be leaving China forever, as far as work goes, and moving on to other places, other adventures. We're not sure yet. I'm currently still in the midst of answering that question of where we'll be next. So probably somewhere in Asia, I'm assuming. We'll have to see where that will be. So guys, thank you so much for listening to episode number 17 of the Nature Talks podcast. Thank you for helping us grow. If you're an educator, please share this podcast in any Facebook groups you may be involved in that are about education, about inquiry, about PYP, about environmental education, outdoor learning, all of that stuff. Leave a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast. And that's it. We'll be talking to you guys later. So wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy, hope you're healthy, and I will be talking to you again soon for the next episode. Bye-bye.